We have now the pleasure of welcoming Cathy Milliken. Cathy Milliken was born in Brisbane and she's now based in Berlin. She, as an oboe player, was a founding member of the Ensemble Modern in Frankfurt, and she worked with artists and composers such as Ligeti, Stockhausen, Boulez, Zappa, and so on. She has composed a lot of pieces for concert, opera, radio, and film. She was also the head of the education department of the Berliner Philharmoniker at the time, at the beginning of Simon Rattle, the time where we met, and she did fantastic participatory work with schools in Aix-en-Provence at the time, around Wagner's Ring. And I think Cathy is one of the best examples of what artists can be today. Performer, composer, specialist in participatory projects, artist in the very wide sense. Thank you very much, Cathy, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Bernhard, for that lovely introduction. The title of my lecture is Sharing the Pie, Creating Music Together. And I'm honored to be here, and I thank you for inviting me. Honored to present some of my work on a topic that is very close to my heart. So, humans have always made music together. They wanted to celebrate life and death, to express emotions, to comment on the world we live in, to laugh with each other, to express grief and joy, and sometimes even abstractly to hint or to try to divine the wonders of the world and life itself. Now today, in the present, Thomas Torino has written a book called Participation, the Politics of Participation, and he's noted two very interesting things which I think you'll agree with. The first is that we seem to have developed now, in the present day, two main ways of working together and making music. It's either participatory, where everyone in a room is making music together, or it's presentational, where there's one half of the hall is listening and the other half is making the music for that listening audience. That is without a value judgment, both, as Bernhard says, and also Humberto Eco in the open work has made the point that listening is a very active experience, because in the imaginations, of course, it becomes authored and written further. But of course also there's the idea of, well, you know, does it always have to be like that? We didn't start off this way, but we've developed to become a type of presentational format of making music rather than the participatory. So what if there were a range of possibilities? What if we opened up, and instead of this sort of oppositional type of feeling, what if we opened up so that musicians could become composers, audience could become composers, performers, and perhaps composers could actually start collaborating with others? That's not a usual thing, because composers normally avoid collaboration, but I'll go into that a little bit later and why that is. So if we look at, you know, what is it that sharing the pie means? What is it as musicians? What can we do? Well, the idea is that, in fact, to share, we need to be in a situation where we can actually investigate this sharing. We need to be in a place where there's time to collaborate. We need to be in a place where it feels safe to actually articulate your ideas to one another. We need to be in a situation where mutuality is looked for, commonalities are looked for. It's not necessarily a place of dissent. Somehow, of course, when human beings do come together, there is a necessity to negotiate collaboration, sure, but there are ways of doing that too. So, in fact, what is this area, what is this space we're looking at? Richard Sennett, who's written wonderful books called The Craftsman or Together, the Rituals, Pleasures and Politics of Cooperation, talks about the place of cooperation as being the workshop. And for me, this workshop idea has really taken on board, so much so that in my private life, I keep saying, oh, we've got a problem, let's workshop it. Somehow workshop has been the solution, because it's an idea of, it's a place of action, of experimentation, of discussion, of actually making and being together. And it has been for centuries, in fact, and Richard Sennett makes the point, if you look back to the time of guilds, you had this situation of a workshop place where people were cooperating, investing their skills in different areas and making things together. So when I begin to make a composition by myself, I am sitting in a room and there's a blank page in front of me. And when I begin a collaborative work with other people, I am in a room participating with others, and the situation is similar. There's the sort of same excitement because nothing has been decided upon and all of the options are open. So in fact, the workshop idea is for me, for collaborating with others, a central hub of a collaborative process and of creating. And ideally, the principles that should be involved, as I said before, is enough time for processes to occur. There's mutuality, equality in ownership is the central thing too. And that must always be made clear in beginning a participatory workshop, that the authorship is shared, because otherwise what incentive is there for people to come along to a workshop? There's obviously the wonderful, human experience of making something together, but in fact there's also the idea that it should be shared and it should be known to be shared. There should be democratic processes occurring. There should be a willingness to move outside habitual practices, and a very good way of communicating. And as I said before, there's a type of negotiating that happens before, that happens during. So this place of workshop is indeed a metaphor for collaborative practices, for the teamwork. Now, when we begin a workshop, obviously there are people of all sorts of skills there. You've got cooks and parents and architects and teachers and cosmeticians and priests and lifesavers, and then you've got you, the music person. And so you've got the skills for that particular workshop. So actually, how do you negotiate democratic processes? That's a very important thing. And for all of you who may begin on this path, it's not a hard path, but it's something that one has to understand, that one as a musician gets quite excited about the idea of creating. And it's very easy then to use your position in the hierarchy of that particular workshop as, oh, you're the skilled one, so you're going to be the boss. And that is actually where composers always fall over, because they get so excited by the possibility of a sound or an idea. A shoal of sharks swimming towards them would not deter them from wanting to follow that idea, and they would be oblivious of the room of people who also have the same notion of actually wanting to see the sound ideas realized. So it is, when you're leading workshops, very important to realize that there are various ways of leading. Sam Hayden and Luke Windsor have written a wonderful article about leading, and they say there are three ways of leading. There's more of a directive approach where it's top down, there's an interactive approach where you're interacting, but there's also a collaborative approach. And I sort of like to think that in fact, when you are leading workshops, there's a sort of continuum there between, and a flow between those, because sometimes you need to bring in your skills, but other times you will also need to step back and just listen or ask questions, and so that your role is, if we consider that a workshop ideally should take place in a circle so that there's no obvious hierarchy in the circle. And I would also suggest that you don't move into the middle of the circle, because that's also not a good idea, but stay as one person on the circle as a workshop leader, and just enjoy the fact that there is this flow that you might be asked to put in a skill, but as all of the other people that you're working with will also be involved in skills. So at this moment, I'm just going to play one project. I will be, in a minute, showing you lots of projects that I did that investigate and show some of the work that I've done. This is a collaborative project with school kids in a township in South Africa. We got together. It's very much of an educative project because they were all members of a choir, but they'd never made up songs before. And this became a project based around Comfort Ye, which you also know from The Messiah. But in fact, that was also interspersed with songs that they made about their everyday life and what it's like growing up in the township.
One step at a time, you will reach your destiny. That is what has kept me alive in my life. Because the policeman made her pregnant.
Did make you pregnant? A child? The boy is to be blamed.
Child, take one step at a time and you will reach your destiny.
So that project exists on this range of collaborational work, because I want to really make the point that there's no real format of making collaborational work, but you really must be, I think, very, very aware of where the collaboration is, where it's not. People have to, when they're being invited to participate, they have to know exactly where they stay on this continuum, because any sort of expectations that get taken up and then not fulfilled, that makes for not a great situation in the workshop. So with this workshop, we went into the school. It was an organization called Umculo, and in this school, the choir was invited to come and make songs about their life. They knew the opera would be about their lives. So it was a workshops over 9 days of continuous workshop activity during the day. We ate together, we socialized together, we got to know the students. We got to know over 9 days also very pertinent things about living in townships. And in fact, when we were there, there was a murder that happened of their, for various things. It's what they live with there every day. So the songs that came about were very moving and very part of their lives, but they also then had a hand in deciding exactly how the songs would be incorporated and what the plot of the opera would be. So I would call that very much a shared authorship between choir students of the Blokenbos Secondary School, between myself, because I actually arranged things and also made a couple of extra songs for them, and Handel. So we had 3 author bodies, if you like to say, equally involved in the project. I think that one thing is I have noted the dilemma of the composer and the dilemma of negotiation within a group, and it can happen. It doesn't matter if you call yourself a composer, but if you are the leader, it is actually investing your skills. And as I said, knowing on this range of going from sole authorship to collaborative authorship, it's just very important to know also to get the experience in a way of how to decide where you are on that range. One other thing before I go to the other projects is just to quickly talk about workshops. So you go into a workshop, it's the blank page. What do you do? I think first the most important thing is what we're going to do now, which is to break the ice. So... Hey! Hey, you want to try it with me? And... Hey! Hey, good. So, because you are musicians, you will also not get faster, and I think because you are musicians, you know how this is going to turn out when you do it together. There's going to be a phasing, and at some point, you're going to come back together again, and I'd like you to all stop immediately you finish the round where you all come back together again, okay? But the delight is you can appreciate, so I'll say that now. The delightful thing about this is beforehand you can imagine, you can say, oh yeah, it's going to be like that. But it's never like actually doing it. So let's do it. Ready? So we'll start everyone together, but you'll already phase off with your extra thing, and you keep your mind on the one you're doing, all right? So you go straight through, dum, bum, 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 do, 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 dum, da, dum, bum. Okay, good. So ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wonderful. So the first thing to do when you've got a workshop, you simply break the ice, and there are lots and lots of ways that you can do that. The second thing, of course, is getting to know each other. It's like inviting people to a party at your house or a dinner at your house. You want to know their names, and you also ask people what they do. So there's a round of introductions. Then you talk about what you're going to do, and you decide together. There are various ways that you can, you can also bring along a structure, but you put it up for democratic consideration within the group. And then you start the experimentation, because the best thing about workshop is the experimentation and what every single person brings to that workshop. If you find that you're coming up with ideas that are a little bit beyond, you want to actually decide to build some sort of strange instrument and no one knows how to do it, obviously you'll have to say, well, that's a no. But if there's an engineer at the group that says, I can do that, then you've already got a yes, and then already you'll be finding that other people will bring their skills in as well. So, as you can see, a workshop is something where, as a musician, because you're used to one-to-one teaching, you might find it a little bit daunting in the beginning, but in fact, when you start doing it and you have a little bit of training beforehand, so that, because the natural desire is to want to walk in and take over and decide how everything's going to go, because negotiating is not our natural thing. But once you learn how to do it, it's exciting, it's fantastic, and perhaps then this type of idea of collaborative music practice can actually get incorporated into our everyday life. So now I'm going to talk about some projects. When you are doing a collaborative music project, as Bernard said before too, you've got to know why you're doing it, with whom and what it is, so that you can actually sensibly decide how your dinner, your party that you're inviting people to is going to turn out. I am actually essentially going to talk about presentational projects. Before, I made the division between participatory, where everyone is participating, or presentational, where in this case, a collaborative work does get presented. The beauty of the collaborative work being presented is that you actually find out, because you've been fine honing and working in a type of set of practices that turn into an artistic result, it's really good to actually show it and see where you're going. So before I was telling you about Comfort Ye, and there you can see, you know, it really did start off quite humbly in the classroom. It was a very dusty classroom, I remember. It was a dusty December, and we had 9 days, and then we had another 3 weeks of rehearsal the following March. So another project, this one was definitely not educative as the one before was. This was much more in a framework of healing. This was immediately following the tsunami, and people were in temporary housing. They were stressed, they were grieving. And so the idea of actually doing workshops was a little bit foreign for them. They weren't quite sure how to go about that. So I went and worked with 3 choirs in the city of Kamaishi. And these choirs were really quite wonderful. One choir had not had any damage or destruction to its area. The other choir had lost everything. So of course it was also a meeting of people who were able to share their experiences of the tsunami and offer help where possible. Definitely a beautiful healing experience. There were children who took part in a small string group. There was the local wind band, and a lot of them had lost family members. So definitely a healing experience. So the actual show that we did, everyone was quite worried about showing the bits of the performance that they were going to bring along. The choir members had made up a song that was arranged for the brass band. Community leaders came and gave their messages. It was called Messages. One of the community leaders did a beautiful thing where she talked about future being the children, and also the idea of healing and looking forwards. So then there were the music teachers who were also grieving and in a space where they weren't really quite sure how to make music again together. So, cut a long story short, there was a little bit of a worry about how we were going to present this. Oh, a concert. Oh, no. And then they said, but you know, it could be a little less formal. I said, well, yeah, it doesn't have to be a formal thing. Well, could we make it a happy yokai? And I found out that happy yokai is something in a school which is just an ad hoc, quick presentation. And afterwards I sort of thought, is that happy okay? I don't know, but it was a good name for what we did show. So that was a concert that was, full of emotion because they were actually talking and being with one another in a collective situation for a long, long time. Their daily lives were actually mainly concerned with, how to take care of the daily needs of the family. So it was a very moving and healing project. It was called Messages, so the score was a PowerPoint presentation, and all of the words that they were giving, the messages of courage, future, and also the song, which was at the end, was about let us look into the spring and see the new flowers that come. That was then followed by another project with the same people, we're keeping the idea and the project flowing. 6 months later, now one has to realize that the sea for the people was a place of danger. And for the school, it was the first time when we took them to the sea and they made an installation, a brass sound installation there. That was the first time that they'd been to the sea, and was about also a type of healing thing of approaching the sea. I was with a visual artist, so of course it's always possible to make these collaborative projects become so involved with different artistic disciplines. And I was with a visual artist who does photography over time. So everyone, as you saw in that musical presentation, they had a light and they were drawing the word mirai, which is, I think that's future. Yes. And here they were drawing stars. So the finished artwork looked like that, which was a beautiful sort of collaborative public engagement action. I'm just going to skip over the next project, which was, I'd say, more of a community-based project. It was based in a particular area of Munich, and that was really about bringing people from the old people's home to various schools, to various community music groups, like a community orchestra. And that was rather a wonderful situation because we could actually make a whole sort of installation in the foyer of the Gasteig in Munich. I don't know if you know that. And, it was great joy. Also, there were refugee groups that came and sang. There were steel drum players that played before the foyer. And we actually introduced the people to bring them into the foyer because we had storytellers that brought people in with stories about living in Heidhausen, which is the area around the Gasteig in Munich. So the next project I'm going to talk about is back to being an educative project, but it's also an advocatory project because it was a work that I did during the Berlin Phil. And it must be said that when you are working for an institution like an orchestra, you are also advocating their repertoire. I mean, nothing wrong with that. It's also a way in to appreciate what is behind a great work. I was always a little bit devious because I always brought in contemporary music. So the next project is based around Stockhausen's Gruppen. And the principal ideas there were to introduce, the various attributes of a tonal and serial composition, so that the planets had all of their different attributes, so that a heavy planet was perhaps also a fortissimo. The speed with which it turned round gave us the speed that they were going to actually attribute to their composition. So there was a lot of sort of thinking about it beforehand, a lot of fun thinking out, what were the attributes of the various planets and how these attributes then became musical attributes. So as you can see in that project too, there were older members playing of the Berlin Philharmonic playing alongside. And I think their attitude was always extraordinary because they said, we're colleagues and we learn just as much from you, the other participants, as you from us. So I think that is also another very important point to know, that you, as perhaps a musical leader of a workshop or a project, actually also benefit, and along with all of the other participants. So I'm just now going to, I've got two more I think to show very quickly. The next project I'm going to show is something that I carried out for over 14 years in Austria, and it's called Lautstark of the Klangspuren Festival. Lautstark is a composition course for young kids from 8 to 18. What was very important there was that all of the kids were always mixed up. The age groups were never cut off, so it was, you know, very demographically mixed. And they had training in, this was sort of graded training, so it was graded into particular families of interest, of instruments, so all the brass would go together, all the winds, but they would also start improvising in those groups because it was sort of intimate and they felt safer. They were also introduced in those groups to different ways of making sounds in a sort of contemporary music idea. Then there's the composition groups, which are the main thing of the course, and they would be, for example, 8 kids with 2 trainers, well, 2 trainer participants, and the 8 kids would really, I mean, over time they got so confident about this that, you know, you could really just sit back, listen and help just a little bit. But of course, one should always play with, because often leader trainers think that, oh, let the participants play. I think that's not quite the right idea. Everyone is in the room there with different skills, and if you play the instrument in the group, then you can actually really help the group and support. It's about supporting. It's not about showing off or anything like that. It's about being in the group and wanting the best result for the group. So I actually took this Gruppen Stockhausen project to the Lautstark people. And as you can see, you know, it's done in smaller groups, and then they all come together because the other arm of the process is actually then being in tutti. So we would have, in the morning, the warm-ups, the breaking the ice. We'd have the family groups going into their families of instruments. We'd have the composition groups breaking up, and then we'd all come together for a tutti improvisation, and sometimes we'd bring along little pieces for them to do as well. So this is their interpretation of the Gruppen by Stockhausen. Because here it is. So the last piece that I'm going to talk to you about on this range of collaborative practice, as I said, the framings are, they can be social, it can be healing, it can be advocatory, it can also take place in a type of social, artistic realm. There's a wonderful quote by Nicolas Boréau that I keep referring to. He brought up and really made up a definition of aesthetic theory for the time, which included the word relational. And that's become a very important word in the whole sort of idea of collaborative work, is that relational refers to the sort of practices of relating together and making art. So he refers to it as relational art, as a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private place. So the next piece was given to me as a commission. It's called Night Shift, and the idea was to present a work of artistic value in the contemporary music world, but it for it to be participatory with the audience. So we already have a dilemma there because we're actually already putting two very quite different pressures on everyone within the group. So I was aware of this, that it was quite a dangerous project. What it ended up being was something of great fun. I included an element of choir, and the choir had to make up their own song, which they did willingly. So there was a creative choir song in the middle. There were pieces just for the ensemble where they could do their thing. And there were also pieces where, for example, the audience was involved in such things as, in one context, I asked them to think of a place that you really like going to. And it could be imaginary, it could be real. And think of three words or phrases that describe that place. But really, what does it feel like, smell like, sound like? So really, that give us, in those 3 words or phrases, does anyone have one? Anyone like to offer? You were writing. Silence. Well, let's be silent. And that's exactly actually what we did in the show. We collected the cards of everyone in the room. We had Helena Raska, who's an amazing altistin, and we had Michael Schieffel, who's a jazz improviser. And together with the ensemble who was improvising, we improvised a whole piece with the texts of the audience. The audience also had things like, in this next part that I'll show you, they were involved in rubbing paper together, which is an extraordinary sound taken throughout the group. And that was another point that was very important for this particular concept, was that every sound was democratically equal. There was no sound that was more important than the other. So everything that the audience did was exactly as important as on stage. And they were, at the end of this piece that I'll show you, they also had aluminium foil, which has the most amazing thing. What I'll show you is it was based around Midsummer Night's Dream, and so this is Titania's absolute tirade about what is happening with the world. Contagious diseases, mud flats, infertile fires, anything you can imagine. So here we go. So in that particular part, just after that, you would have been rubbing papers together. There was a silence, and then there would have been a rumble of drum. And so everyone was actually creating that atmosphere together. The last couple of things I'll show you from that particular piece is that the audience plays whirlies, which are tubes that you whirl above your head. So we had to give them an instruction. We had to give them the skills beforehand. Yes, for the whirlies, you stand in the aisle and you don't hit your neighbor with them, and you whirl them above your head. And then the other thing that they had to do was to play stones together. Now, for me, that was actually the highlight of the piece, was this moment where in a very still, there were just pizzicato instruments, sometimes short notes, and then these tapping of stones coming from everywhere in the audience, and it was just exquisite. So here we go. So you'll hear whirlies first, and then you'll hear stones. We've moved to stones now. So I think the last thing I'd like to impart to you is that this is a process which, you know, if you put your mind to it, it's something which is rather extraordinary, is to be changing the face of how we're going to actually make music together in the future. The goal for me is to keep on with collaborative practice and keep investigating this whole range that is possible. Okay, there will always be soul-authored works, and as you see with this extraordinary organ performance we had before, how beautiful and necessary that is for that intensity of research and gorgeous result. But on that range of compositional practice, with introducing peu à peu various amounts of collaboration that happen over various amounts of time with different goals, but at the same time, you're still investigating this range of practice, this collaborative continuum. So I think it would be amazing if this social artistic practice can become part of our lives. Claire Bishop, who's a wonderful mentor and wonderful writer about social art and participation in art, makes the point that in fact, if social artistic projects do become critiqued, in some way we need to almost develop or think up a new set of artistic values to actually then bring this whole sort of realm of human artistic endeavor all together. So here's to the future, here's to collaboration. Wonderful to meet you. Thank you very much.